Okay, so Emmett, are you going to go over the
yes.
team instructions?
So just a reminder. Yes, happy to. So just a reminder to folks that please do keep your videos on to the extent possible. And if you do have comments or would like to participate, the raise your hand function will be the best way to indicate that, and I can be monitoring that. And if anyone looks like anyone hasn't been acknowledged in a while, I'll make sure that the chair is aware of that. But Chair Westerman, I think you'll have a good sense based on that function of who's looking to participate. And then a reminder to please mute your mics if you're not talking. And those are the basic housekeeping questions. The chat, we're hoping to use the chat function only for kind of technical difficulties, just knowing that this is a public meeting. And so to make sure that members of the public that are listening in either on the live stream or on the recording that's posted to the CAP board website later will be able to hear the full extent of the conversation. And I'll turn it back to you, Chair Westerman.
Great. Well, it's good to see everyone again, and I hope you've had a chance to take a deep breath and relax at least once since the last time I saw you all. We're going to start today by sharing our names again, just to get everybody back on board, and in 2 to 3 sentences, speak to what makes you interested, excited about serving on this advisory task force. And we'll go in reverse alphabetical order this time. Jason. And I'll begin. I think what interested me most about this task force is that there has to be a way to implement change, and for Minnesotans to have an opportunity to be heard. And one of the most motivating comments to me since I was a little kid was, "You can't do that." And it was a challenge. I'll find a way. And so I think that's what is motivating to me about serving on this task force as well, is we know there has to be something changed in the policies and the procedures, and we'll figure it out. So, Daniel Yang, you're up.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I never get to go towards the beginning when we're going down lists, so this is exciting. Similar to you, of course, I am really excited about the opportunity to figure out how folks can use their agency and voice to make things more reflective, especially in a place as important as the area of the Capitol. Also, since my role in starting in local government here in the mayor's office, just really feel like it's a great responsibility. You know, the folks that don't necessarily know how or weren't involved originally in shaping how we think and how these rules were established. I think it's incredibly important to create avenues and make sure what we land on is in language and processes that are accessible to all folks across the state.
Thank you. Commissioner Roberts Davis.
Good afternoon. So soon. I didn't expect to be called on so soon. Thank you, Chair. I am excited about this process because I think that much like you, we have identified a gap and there's an opportunity to solve a problem. And I enjoy building processes. And so I think that this is a really good opportunity for us to work together to solve a problem that exists. I'm also excited to be also a part of the public engagement task force. And so I look forward to sharing the knowledge that I'm learning between the two groups. And so I think that that'll be a really interesting perspective that I'll be able to share. Thanks.
Great.
Oh, and Alice Roberts Davis from the Department of Administration.
Thank you. Is Senator Nelson on with us? Doesn't look like it.
Doesn't look like Senator Nelson is on right now.
Okay. Representative Lee. Is that another one?
Yep, it doesn't look like Representative Lee has been able to join.
Let's see, I'm looking at the list at the bottom. I don't see Tish Jones. And then that takes us to Jennifer Jones.
Yes, good afternoon. I'm Jennifer Jones. I'm with the Minnesota Historical Society. We've been through a number of issues that have really created some degree of sensitivity or controversy. And I think what I have really grown to appreciate and what makes me excited to be on this particular commission is how important it is, and also how rewarding it is to work with a real cross-section of people towards a common goal. And so I'm really pleased to be here. I'm pleased to be getting to know you all and to be engaging in this dialogue.
Great, thank you. Dr. Jolly. Oh. Okay, Dr. Jolly.
There we are. Does this work?
Yes, there.
So I'm Eric Jolly, President and CEO of the St. Paul and Minnesota Foundation. And one of the issues that we're concerned with around equity is who gets to tell the story, whose narrative do we represent, and how do we represent the many different narratives of our community. As such, I also had a chance to serve on the Restorative Justice Circle that considered the issues of Mike Forcia around the removal of the Columbus statue and all that attended around that. And as the former president of the Science Museum, we built the race exhibit or any other exhibits that represented culture. We really wondered whose voice, whose story, and what time frame. And so I think how we build community is about how we share and value each other's narrative. And understanding that and understanding the impermanence of stories and history is something that intrigues me. And I think this commission will be tackling a very important question around that. Thank you.
Thank you. Up next, Jessica Intermil.
Thank you, Chair Westerman. I'm Jessica Intermil, and I'm a lawyer in Minneapolis. I am also really excited to explore how to bring more stories forward and more storytelling forward, although it's for very selfish reasons. I grew up taking Native studies classes and Black history classes and knowing the whole time that there's no such thing as slaves without slaveholders. There's no such thing as folks who are colonized without colonizers. And so when we tell the full story, we're not just telling Native stories or Black history or the stories of various subgroups, we're also telling all of our history. So selfishly, when my 8-year-old daughter goes to school, I want her to learn all of our history, and I want to make a path forward for that. Also, I really, really like when systems work for people. And so I'm really excited to be on this task force for that reason. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Lieutenant Governor Flanagan.
Hello, I'm Peggy Flanagan. I'm the Lieutenant Governor of the great state of Minnesota. But more importantly, in this role, I'm the chair of the CAP board. And I am, excited to be part of this work for many of the reasons that folks have mentioned before my opportunity to share. But I think the biggest thing is, my vocation is that people are seen, heard, valued, and believed. And the work of this task force is deeply connected to that. And this is something that I have had concerns and lots to say about before I was in a role where I could actually do anything about it. So I think part of it is also just that, I think I've been speaking this moment into an existence for a long time, and now have to put up or shut up. And so that is also what this moment is providing. Thank you.
Up next is Lindsey Dyer.
Hi, everybody. I'm Lindsey Dyer, and these days I have a few hats. I work as a consultant in history and archives. In my past life, I worked at the Historical Society, and I also worked in libraries. My main job that I do now, though, is in design research and user experience design. And now there isn't a lot of consulting to be done in nonprofits. It's expensive to do this research. So most of my work is in for-profits. And I someday have a dream of doing this work professionally with government and state. And I'm very interested in how people interact with spaces and places. And especially with monuments, when you go and you see what it is that this entity decided to put in stone for, the foreseeable future. A lot of questions come up. I love Dr. Jolly's list of questions, and that's part of user experience design. When you're experiencing the monuments, you say to yourself, what does this state value? Who are they seeing, hearing, valuing, believing? When you leave, what is it that you remember? And I'm really interested in how the person walks away, and how the person is impacted by what they see. So I'm interested in this task force as opposed to the other one, because I have been so involved in policies and museums and libraries, and I know how important they are, because that's where everything starts, is with that policy, and then ensuring that it's an appropriate policy for what it is that we're hoping to achieve.
Great, thank you. Let's see, Auditor Blaha.
Oh, hello. It is a little harder going last because everyone said everything you've already wanted to say. So everything you've all said, plus, again, this is Julie Blaha. I'm your state auditor. And I've always been kind of a process person, whether it was as a treasurer or a math teacher or as a parliamentarian. I really love processes that help people talk about difficult things in particular, so that people feel like the discussion is fair. And ideally, I love processes that support a good decision without distracting from it. Ideally, you don't even notice the process is there, is that good and that intuitive. And so I'm a big fan to get into that. How do we create something that going forward, what we're talking about is center stage, and what we're learning and trying to understand, not the process.
Great. Dr. Bean.
Hello, everyone. I think when I think about what motivates me, as the daughter of a community organizer, whenever there's a problem or an issue or a tension, instead of running away from it, I run towards it. And that's just, I did a Myers-Briggs test, one personality test as part of a team at one point, and I am an advocate, apparently. And part of what I advocate for is more adequate and authentic representation of Native peoples within public spaces. And as somebody who comes from a family that's deeply rooted within this state, just being at the table for me is incredibly important. Being a representative of my family and community here is important. And to be a part of a collaborative process is something that I really enjoy. I like to model the ways in which we can move forward together. And I just look forward to working with everybody.
Mm-hmm. Dana Badgerow.
Yes, hi. I'm Dana Badgerow. I'm a public citizen, retired from about 7 different jobs. My nexus to the Capitol is quite close. Twice I served as Commissioner of Administration, and in the second iteration was the one who originated the Capitol renovation project under the Pawlenty administration. But I was really privileged to serve under Dayton on the Preservation Commission as a public member. So my nexus to the Capitol is very, very keen and close. I don't think I can really duplicate like Auditor Blaha. So much has been said with such eloquence already. I represent a white privileged woman, and I'm here I think maybe for some balance, but I also want to learn. I have a lot to learn, and I'm selfish about that. I would like to learn more about these issues that we're dealing with. But before I go, I really want to applaud the Restorative Justice Project that Dr. Jolly referenced. I think it was remarkable. I, of course, only know what I've read in the news, but it is a true testimony to people coming to the table and speaking truth. So thank you.
Thank you. Tess Jones, we're talking about why we're excited and interested to be on the task force.
Thank you, and apologies for being tardy. My name is Tess Jones, and I'm excited to be on the task force. I'm born and raised in the city of St. Paul, so St. Paul is an important place to me. The Capitol is an important place to me in terms of the many engagements that I've had there, but also just in terms of this specific work. I'm really interested in representation. Someone else earlier said processes. I love the process. End goals are great, but I think processes that's where we learn the most about one another. That's where the really rich exchange happens. And we can get to alternative end goals at a later date based on what we learn in the process, right? Like we have an end goal, somewhat of an end goal in mind whenever we begin a process, and then we learn more about other products and other endings and other goalposts that may also be beneficial when we're involved in a good process. So I'm really humbled to be here and to be working with other folks who are super interested. I'm also interested in learning. So yeah, that's why I'm here.
Okay. Thank you. And Jason Adkins.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Jason Adkins, Executive Director of the Minnesota Catholic Conference. Glad to be with you again for this next couple of days of meetings. Excited to be a part of this process just to build opportunities and avenues for citizen engagement, participatory democracy, giving more people a voice and a medium and a better set of tools to be able to participate in important public conversations. I'd also say that our Capitol is a big gift and a treasure for our state, and it's a treasure that should be stewarded effectively. And we need to think of ourselves in this process, from my perspective, as stewards. How do we best affect and most effectively steward this treasure that belongs to everyone in our state? Thanks very much.
Great, thank you. Did I miss anyone? If they're not here, they won't tell me. Thank you all for the insightful discussion that we had at our last meeting. We took a good swipe at our first goal of completing a review of the policies and procedures. And it's pretty clear that everyone is thinking broadly and critically about the work before us. I like the words I've heard here: process, engagement, stewards. I like that one a lot, and that's encouraging. So thank you all very much for taking on this task. I'm especially heartened by the focus on how we incorporate everyday Minnesotans into our thinking. That idea of accessibility, of clarity, and fairness were all words that came up in our discussion. So thank you for that wide vision that you all have. So those are words that we'd like to keep in mind as we begin to dive into the specifics of our work here. And today and tomorrow's meeting, if we need that time as well, we'd like to focus on our conversation on the policy for commemorative works. And the staff emailed that out ahead of time for you. And it's important, like we mentioned in the last meeting, that we begin to identify gaps. So using accessibility, fairness, and clarity as our frame, let's focus on the policy and begin to identify areas where we may need to suggest improvements. So specifically, let's discuss concerns with the language that, as it is, gaps or elements of the policy that may be missing, and what type of forms and documents may be missing as well. Do we need contact information for our fellow Minnesotans? Then during our next meeting, we can begin to discuss what types of solutions we'll need to come up with, either new draft language or additional documents, for example. And then in our next meeting, we'd also like to include a presentation about what other cities and planning boards and states have in place for policies on commemorative works. So at the end of this meeting, I'll ask for a volunteer or two to work with the staff on conducting a review of existing policies around the country with the goal of presenting to our group. But for today and tomorrow, our focus is on the existing capboard policy. So if everybody's ready, we'll jump in. Our goal here is to generate a comprehensive list of gaps in and concerns about the existing capboard policies, so we can create a starting point for future solution-oriented conversations. Task force members, you were asked to think about and identify concerns and gaps ahead of the meeting and to come prepared to speak to them. So let's see what we can pull together. Shall we start with concerns about the existing language? Good to go? What problems, what issues do you have with the language of the policy for commemorative works as it stands today?
And while folks are referencing that, I'm happy, Chair Westerman, if you'd like to pull up either the policy itself, if folks want to refer to specifics, or to pull up a note-taking sheet that I could use that folks could reference as we address these. So you tell me, and I'm happy to do either of those.
Okay. I think we all have a copy of the policy, so the note-taking might be especially helpful for us to keep track of what others have said. Okay, Dana, I see your hand.
I'm going to start with the most obvious, which is the policy doesn't talk about the removal of any commemorative work. The statute does. It talks about the Historical Society being the ultimate authority for the removal of monuments, but the policy is silent on the issue. It does talk about relocating, but not removal. So that's just kind of an obvious one.
Okay, thank you. Lindsey? Oh, okay. I can't see.
Lindsey, you might be on mute there.
Okay.
Oh, I'm sorry. Sorry. I actually unraised my hand instead of doing mute. Okay. On that, I was looking at page 1, section 1, number 1. So, I mean, I feel like to preserve and commemorate the diverse people of Minnesota and their values. A lot of questions come up as far as what happens if it's not and who's deciding. It feels like maybe I'm missing something, but some clarity on who's deciding whether or not it is diverse. And then also the question, and inclusive, and also the question, what if it's not? What happens? So to me, there are a lot of questions throughout as far as, okay, this looks good, but I don't know if it's exactly clear about what happens if it's actually not producing the outcome we want.
Okay. Thank you, Lindsey. Dr. Jolly.
Thank you. I've posted briefly in the chat a clearer sentence than I will perhaps convey through this audio, but I think for me, what's missing is indeed a mechanism for removal, but also a mechanism for review and for modification. There's this sense of permanency in what is written, which I think is an assumption within the language and the entire statute as we set this up that I'd like to challenge. And I think, the people of New Mexico are dealing with nuclear waste because somewhere long ago in history, people never imagined it would be settled with a density enough that it would be wrong to put our nuclear waste in their basements and in their caves. This sense of we know now what will be forever needs to be challenged. And what was true 300 years ago, even in our language, would be described differently today. And so I'd like to attack and address that assumption of permanency and the dichotomy of retain or remove. It doesn't include any sense of modify, and it doesn't have a sense of review. So those are the issues that I see as worthy of addressing. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Jolly. Tish, you're next, and then Jessica.
I think a question that I have also about page 1, section 1 has to do with a wonder about values, specifically from a state perspective and in regard to state institutions. And it's similar to a comment that was already made, but I wonder if there is something that informs what the state values, or the ways in which the state values the complex histories of the people and persons who live here and the people and persons who could be impacted by certain monuments. So is there a document that can be referred to that is also a part of that conversation, a part of that decision-making process? So, the state, we've seen what has happened to certain monuments here recently, right? So I think, is there any existing language about the state's commitment to non-violent sort of commemorative pieces or representations or cultural artifacts, and sort of considering their placement or whatever, or thinking about this sort of emotional well-being of the citizens of Minnesota when erecting certain monuments and statues and etc. I'm curious about whether that document exists or if it can be developed, and if it exists or can be developed, can it be linked, tied, and connected to this particular policy?
Good question. Okay. Jessica, you're next, and then Dr. Bean.
I had the same sense that Dr. Jolly did about the sort of presumed permanency throughout the entire document. But in the existing language, what really spoke or jumped out to me is that Objective 5 is its own standalone, we will assure the maintenance of things that are already there. And that is fundamentally incompatible with even Objective 6 that talks about relocation. You can't both keep a thing the way it always is and relocate. So one of the problematic pieces that I see is that Objective 5.
Okay, thank you. Dr. Bean, and then Auditor Blaha.
Yeah, I think part of what I'm about to say was kind of covered a bit. Tish put it really, really well. Thinking about, what is the statement on what is being, what are the standards of these values that ensure diversity and promote equality? How is that language worked through this document so that it's actually actionable and it's not just words on paper? And there's something within the policy under the principles that talks about how over time, artworks and texts have accumulated over several generations of time and thus reflect a variety of ideas and opinions expressed by Minnesotans since 1905. And understanding that a statement like that has a real impact on people, and thinking about how does a statement like that exist in tandem with promoting equality and diversity. It doesn't, I don't know how it exists together within one document and needs to be addressed.
Okay, thank you. Auditor Blaha.
Lots of good stuff there, particularly, I was also thinking about the idea of the removal thing, kind of the obvious one that we need to address. So again, backing up a lot of people's stuff here, but also, the way this is written in a really very academic voice, and also I think needs just a really basic vocabulary list, some definitions on this. And this also gives us a chance to talk about this being a living document as our understanding of diversity expands. And as our understandings expand, there might be ways to change definitions in a way that make it easier to keep the document. But also, we need to definitely point to what does a word like commemorative mean? What do those things mean?
Great. Tish, is your hand still up, or do you have another thought? Oh.
I forgot to lower my hand. I'm so sorry.
No, that's all right. Okay. Dana.
I'd like to weigh in on what the Auditor Blaha just mentioned. I think it's just not written for ordinary people. There are phrases that are really mystifying. Urban context, articulate the urban fabric, punctuate the urban landscape. I don't know what kind of language that is, but it doesn't speak to ordinary people. So maybe it's architectural, I don't know, but I think whatever it is we come up with needs to be crystal clear and crisp.
Thank you. Lindsey.
I keep rereading page 3, the bottom of section 3. It says that what they all have in common, 4 primary functions, and I just feel like something's not right here. It feels like to cause remembrance, to inform, inspire. It feels like war memorial type language to me. And I think that there are a lot of memorials I've seen out there that are reflective of, just like that are like an artistic expression of pain felt by a people, and not so memorialized in a grandioso way. And I think that could be done in a lot of different ways. And I feel like these 4 things that they all have in common. First of all, I think it's already mentioned earlier what they should do, what it should do. I don't know if we need to call this out, because it feels like it's putting it in a little bit of a box.
Okay, thank you. Daniel.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just to join the auditor and other folks who have talked about the specific style of language used. But beyond that, I think it would be worth it to just include a couple of sentences saying to folks, whatever we land on, to indicate to folks either in email, I know that the number is listed, but that there is support available to folks who need an additional walkthrough in clarification on something like what this means. I know a lot of folks on this call are doctors and lawyers and can grasp that. That doesn't mean that other folks should feel intimidated or any less available to try and go through this process. And so I think just explicitly noting that there are folks available at the state to help walk through this process would be great.
Okay. That's a great start. Dana.
Sorry, I'm just coming in with the nits and gnats, but it seems to me that what really struck me as strange was that it mentions events as possibly commemorative. Events, ceremonies, or even a grove of trees. And yet there's no other mention of that kind of ephemeral happening anywhere else in the policy. So I think it either needs to be explained and expanded or deleted.
Jessica?
I first want to thank Danielle for bringing up that there is existing help for folks who are trying to navigate this process, because that did not even a little bit come through from the policy. But what that tells me too is that one of the gaps in the policy is transparency around who is making decisions and how to ask for decision making. Really neither one, for example, what happens if there's a proposal, but it doesn't meet XYZ criteria? Does it just go away? Does anyone ever get a call? Who is doing the asking or who is doing the deciding? Because, it's funny that the language that is definitely academic is also very passive voiced. Decisions are made, but you don't know by whom.
You just made my English teacher heart flutter, talking about passive voice. Commissioner Roberts Davis.
And just building onto that, it just seems like the request comes into the CAP board, and tying that back to the question about the value statement. It's the CAP board's values and the submitter's values who are being recognized, but nobody else's values who are actually being recognized. So if those two entities' values are being met, then it's possible that that's going to be some sort of commemorative work that's going to be on the Capitol complex, and there's just no other space for other opinions to be heard on whether that meets Minnesota's values or not. So not to be Captain Obvious, but there's just not a lot of space for a lot of other input on whether or not values of Minnesotans are being heard in that submission.
Okay. So Jason, go ahead.
Perhaps I'm missing something and it's found in statute or some other rules, and maybe the staff can lay that out for us. But there's questions surrounding who pays. So outside groups have been involved in paying for these monuments. What fiscal obligations are incurred by the state when they embrace a monument? When a monument or a memorial is created, it occupies some space on the Capitol grounds that then therefore can't be occupied by some other monument. So what property interests are raised, what fiscal obligations accrue, what role do groups who had a role in sponsoring or paying for monuments and memorials, what ongoing interest do they have, especially when you're talking about removal or modification? So those are significant gaps, and maybe those are addressed somewhere else, but they're certainly not in this document.
I agree. Auditor Blaha.
Real fine point, but it's time to update the maps. There's some old titles on there, and I think there was a couple things that are just inconsistent with the document.
What? Yes, Commissioner Roberts Davis.
Since we're getting into fine points, I thought that the 10-year post-death of a person is a little bit arbitrary. I wondered about that as well. So throw that out there since we're being nitpicky.
Precise. Okay, Lindsay and then Jessica.
So again, looking at that map and looking at all of the memorials and thinking about the fact that they might have had an application to apply to have those memorials go up, or maybe not. Maybe it was a gentleman's agreement at some point. I don't know. What is the paperwork? And if there is any, to submit that, can we have examples out so that we could see? Can that be public so that somebody who wants to apply could, what's already been done? And it reminds me, so I sit on the State Historic Preservation Review Board, and that is similar where you submit an application, whether or not the property is going to be listed on the National Registry, and it goes through all of these different hoops, many hoops to jump through before it's listed on the registry. And I don't know how many hoops there are here. Maybe there should be more to get more voices in. So I'm just kind of wondering about that.
Okay, that's a good description. How many hoops are there? All right, Jennifer, and then the Lieutenant Governor.
Yes, I wanted to respond to, I think it was Commissioner Roberts Davis who just mentioned that 10-year guideline. That's also something that we have in the policy for works of art within the Capitol. Its intention is obviously so that there's not some sense of trying to commemorate something that's so fresh in historic memory that there isn't hasn't been a period of time for reflection or for its the full implications of it to play out. Although I do agree that the time frame is somewhat arbitrary. I mean, how long does it take to give you historical perspective? I think the intent, however, is to make sure it's not something that's sort of in the immediate past of a year or two. It is something that I would hope that the two policies will stay somewhat parallel on, though. So I'll be interested if we wanted to have more conversation about what that time frame should be. If that needs to change, we should consider it for the other policy as well.
Thank you. Lieutenant Governor.
Thank you. This is the time of day when the sun shines directly on my face, and so excuse me if I can't see me or I'm a little squinty here, but I think to build on what was just said by Lindsey about what that process actually looks like. There is no the language makes reference to submitting a written proposal, right, to the CAP board's executive secretary, but there's no details as to how to actually make that happen. So I think address, phone number, that type of thing. And additionally, the policy doesn't have any way to interface, so like with the internet, for the interwebs, for example. So like a submission form, website info, that kind of thing as well. So just updating it to make it more accessible. And I think just to come back to Lindsey's point, having an example of what it could look like, I think is also would be really helpful here.
I agree. Dr. Bean, and then Dana.
Under Section 5 objectives for commemoration, number 2 is to be of lasting significance for the people of Minnesota. And it would be nice if that language were a bit more inclusive of both the community members and Native community members who are no longer in Minnesota. And so we had a regional, so that would broaden it out to understand that Minnesotans aren't just in Minnesota.
Okay, couldn't quite hear you well, Kate. It was a little bit scratchy. You want to try again?
Are you able to hear me now?
There's still a lot of static. But we did get that you were looking at objective or number 2 under Section 5, that commemorations be of lasting significance for the people of Minnesota. And let me know if I got this right. It be inclusive of Dakota communities that were original to what we now consider the state of Minnesota.
And Dr. Bean, this is Emmett. If you put that in the chat, I'm happy to add it to this note-taking document as well.
Okay, great, thank you. Oh, of those no longer here, no longer residing in Minnesota. Okay. All right. And Dana.
As long as we're talking about the maps, I find this map very interesting, the commemorative and non-commemorative public art in the capital area. It's the first time it's the only time that term appears, non-commemorative. And as I look through the list, I'm scratching my head to say which of these might be non-commemorative. And is it Earthbound? What in the world is Earthbound? That's not clear by its name. But certainly if that is a term of art that we want to use, it should be defined. And the other thing is, it would be interesting to me if we could hear from staff, what are some applications that have been denied and why? Just to give us some sense of, what is the pattern here, what kind of issues have come before the CAP board and what kinds of decisions have been made. And maybe there aren't any, maybe they've all been granted, but I think it would be helpful to know if there have been some that have been denied.
Okay. Lieutenant Governor Flanagan.
I'm just the guy who forgot to put her hand down.
Oh. Okay.
So, well, there you go. Thanks.
Jennifer? Okay, that might be the same. Okay. Lindsay, I
Jennifer,
see
you might be on mute there.
Oh, okay.
I'm sorry, Chair Westerman, did you ask me a question? I had to step away just for a moment.
Your hand is up.
Oh, my mistake. I'm sorry.
Okay. All right. Lindsay, your hand is up.
Hi. It was mentioned earlier about who pays for it, and again, I could have missed it, but if it sounded like from last time, if somebody presented an application and said we're going to pay for this, and then it's approved, it goes through, or maybe not. But I'm wondering if it could be clear on, say, who's paying for the materials, the actual installation, and if it is the organization that's coming through and that's funding that, what about the organizations that are, don't have the funds? What kind of resources are there? Just kind of broaden that out so it's more transparent of, okay, this group wants to submit something, they don't have the funds, but here's what you could do. Just kind of make that more clear.
Okay. Another good suggestion. Okay, so we've talked about problems with or issues with the language as it stands now. Gaps, what's not reflected in the language. Any other missing documents or forms that you've noticed that we haven't mentioned already? Auditor Blaha?
Maybe it's more of a general question about, how long an application is good for. I remember I was part of the group that was working to get the Workers' Memorial done, and it was a multi-year process to get that money together, all of that. And I'm not sure if they got the approval right at the beginning, but my worry would be you get the approval 20 years later, standards have really evolved, and you still haven't raised money. Do you still get to put it in? Are there some time limits in there, especially when things can take a while to raise the money for?
Okay. Jessica.
One of the things two things that stood out to me. I think the first is that if there were an electronic form or just a list of questions that folks could respond to, I think that would be much easier for the people both who are submitting the application and the staff who are reviewing it, who would have a bit more symmetry to what they're looking at across applications. But even zooming out a little bit from this policy, one of the things that stood out to me about our last meeting was Dr. Jolly's discussion of how there's no entry point into what is a fairly Byzantine overlapping of statutes and rules and agencies. And so I wonder if it would be possible to make, an info at that if anyone had any question, they could ping a person who would then send it out to the right agency and the right staff folks.
Okay. And then Paul Mandel said, would there be an expectation of staff responding in writing where appropriate or where input and answers are expected. Which seems to be part of that process. If these are electronic forms, if it's email, who is responsible for answering? Commissioner Roberts Davis.
I was going to say, Chair Westerman, building on Auditor Blaha's point, should there be some sort of disposition or adjudication within a certain amount of time, like 180 days for either removal or acceptance of a new statute, so that we don't have a situation where the adjudication goes on forever and ever, to avoid having to make some sort of decision about removal or addition of a commemorative work to the Capitol complex. So that might be another thing that we'd want to add in the language of the policy.
Okay. Jessica?
It could also be helpful there if there is a denial to make the board explain why. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Excellent. Excellent work, everyone. We're on to page 3 of notes. Dana.
You know, we talk so much about public engagement, and there is another group looking at that, and I assume that whatever comes out of that will input here, but I think we need to be very explicit. Is this the CAP board making this insular decision behind closed doors, or is there an opportunity for public input?
Okay. That's a good question. Where do our two groups intersect in our work? Okay, I lost my screen here, trying to check the chat. Okay, there we go. All right. Existing language, key gaps, what's not reflected in the policy language, missing documents forms, missing contacts, anything else? Jason?
Just quickly, in the statutory report regarding memorials and what the board has to do with vis-a-vis the legislature, it says that testimony is required, but it's not clear what actions the legislature can or cannot take after that testimony is provided, and what legislative oversight there is over the ultimate disposition or creation of any monument or memorial.
Great. Thank you. Lindsay?
Regarding accessing this document, did we talk? I'm not sure if we talked about that. Where would I find this? How would I know about it? I'm thinking about libraries because it's a good place to have this kind of information or ways to get out to people. But yeah, I don't know how I would ever find this.
Okay. So accessibility issues for Minnesotans everywhere, and not limited to online access or other kinds of print policies that are not readily available. Okay. Okay. That is an exceptional list, I think. Dana, you have another one to add?
I just wanted to respond to Lindsay's question. I just Googled monuments in Minnesota Capitol, and the CAP board website came up first, and the very first listing is the commemorative works in the Minnesota State Capital Area Policy. So it is pretty readily accessible with a Google search.
Good work. And on your phone. Lieutenant Governor Flanagan.
Thank you. I absolutely meant to raise my hand this time. So I just want to kind of rattle off quickly some of the forms that I think are still missing. So there's no clear form for members of the public to request that a work be added, to request that a work be altered, to request that a work be removed, and there's no online site for members of the public to leave comment on forms that have been submitted on any of these 3 requests. So just getting into the details there, that those are, I think, some of those, the most important pieces of I think what we will hopefully walk away from completing or done here.
Okay. Commissioner Roberts Davis.
Just gave me an idea of a slightly different direction, which is if there are interpretations on any of the commemorative statues or works of art out on the Capitol complex, do we need something that allows people to suggest that there may be an error or some sort of edit or change to the interpretation? So maybe that's another form, is that there needs to be some sort of update to the interpretation.
Okay. All right then. Oh, Paul Mandel.
Yeah, Madam Chair. I'm just looking for a determination of a lot of these are very, very good points. The document is clearly dated. I'm just wondering how the task force wishes, where possible, to have answers or clarifying answers. Some of these can be quite readily answered. Others are will need a lot of work. But I'm just wondering how the task force wishes to have a response to some of the points.
That's a good question. I think we're brainstorming at this point.
Okay.
And we can take that up after break. We'll have a little break here in just a few minutes, and then we can take that up after that. Commissioner Roberts Davis.
Sorry, I'm not normally this chatty. I think you're absolutely right, Chair Westerman. Brainstorming mostly, I think there was a question that Dana asked though about other works of art that have been approved and how that process went. That was one outstanding question that I think we did want to have answered by the staff at the CAP board.
Okay.
And jumping in here as my CAP board chair hat on, I would say maybe, Paul, at some point a good thing to do here would be even to walk through the Nellie Stone Johnson statue, and just that's probably their most recent example, and could speak to how that came to be. Maybe not right now, but I think that's a good example for a future meeting or conversation.
Thank you for that recommendation. That would be helpful, especially for those of us who've not participated in this process before. And whose screen are we sharing? There we go. Thank you, Emmett. And Dr. Jolly, you had a comment in the chat.
I think he had to leave.
Okay, and he just says he appreciates the need for distinction between accessible and understandable and need to access alternative interpretations. Okay, there we go. All right, I think this is a good place for us to take a 5-minute break and stretch and blink after watching our screens for a little over an hour here. So we'll come back in 5 minutes and figure out if there's anything we've left out. All right. Okay. There, sound is good. Everybody's refreshed. Let the dogs out and back in. Okay, our goal for this afternoon is to generate a comprehensive list of gaps and concerns. So how do you feel about our list so far? Did we get to 4 pages, Emmett?
I think we're just at about 3 pages.
Oh, double space it, we'll have more.
I can double space, decrease the size of the margins and increase the size of the font.
There you go. You can tell I work with students. Okay, I was looking through to see what other things I had highlighted when I went through and read the policy, and pretty much everything has come up in our discussions here, and I really appreciate your detailed comments and suggestions. I think the one thing that stuck out to me the most as I was reviewing this is that that idea of a written proposal may be intimidating to some people, especially when there are some specific elements of that proposal. Scope and nature, goals and objectives, general programmatic needs, cost. You know, and these are elements of proposal writing that may not necessarily be tools that everyday Minnesotans who want to participate in this process have access to. So I think some of the suggestions that you had about forms, better descriptions of the processes will be really helpful in addressing that. Any other observations? Okay, Jessica?
One of the other themes that goes throughout the policy is an idea that there's only so much space. And so we can't put a whole lot more in because there's only so much space. But we also don't know where the existing monuments came from. And I wonder if in the process towards a more inclusive landscape, if it might be helpful to know, why do we have the ones that we already have that the policy says that we're supposed to keep there?
Okay. Excellent question. Because we've got a lot about selection criteria, site collection criteria, but not necessarily why we have the ones that are already there. Lindsay.
That comment reminded me of the it says somewhere, a few places, that it should accentuate or punctuate the landscape. It should complement the natural environment around it. But I'm also wondering, according to who? I mean, are these landscape architects reviewing and understanding whether or not that's happening? And I'm just thinking about all the specialists that could potentially review these and help inform that aspect of it.
Okay. Yep, and those are from page 3 in section 3, that punctuating and enhancing not just any landscape, but the urban landscape. Auditor Blaha.
State Auditor, looks like you're on mute there.
Thank you. I think when one of the concerns sometimes people have, if you make something more accessible, that now you get flooded with requests. And so is there a way we could set the expectation? I think they're trying to set the expectation about this is not an easy process. We're not putting them in regularly, but making it very clear that it's not just say, hey, I have a great idea, but we need to have a place with some honesty about just how much this really costs, what this effort really is. So someone isn't putting a whole bunch of time into it, and then you come to this idea of saying, wow, do you realize that the kind of money you're talking about is potentially millions, worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. And so again, I want it to be very accessible, but I want people to have a sense that this is not something you're going to be able to do alone. You're going to have to organize, you're going to have to get yourself together. You're going to have to have a lot of buy-in and a lot of support to get something like this through.
Okay. Is that information we have for the memorials that are there, cost and time?
I think the point that other people have made before me, though, having examples, I think the idea of having case studies there, and I think that the Workers' Memorial, since it is pretty recent as well, and it's a memorial, but it's also outside, is another good one to track just how long that really took and what were other people's processes in the past. And if it is just kind of a history of how we commemorate history, having that kind of a document available to say, here are other people's experiences with this, might get at the concern I have.
Okay, so the Nellie Stone Johnson and the Workers' Memorials. Okay, Jason.
I think Auditor Blaha's point is an excellent one, and I think that we should lay out at the beginning and the end, whether it's creation or removal, a set of threshold expectations or a set of threshold factors that have to be met before we start going even instigating a board review process. It takes people's time and energy and effort, and you have to meet certain thresholds before you even start the review process. I'm looking at New York City's plan that they just put together, similar to what we're trying to do here. And for example, evaluation process for the removal of monuments and public art, they've got a 4-factor test and a threshold set of questions that you have to meet before even something like that's considered, and resources are devoted to taking time to review this and everything else. So I think that's an excellent point, and it just creates a certain threshold level of work that people need to put in, so that it's not just you fill out a form and all of a sudden it turns the engines of state government, and we're expending all these resources on something that either doesn't have a lot of support or isn't a serious proposal to begin with. I think that's in everyone's interest.
Thank you for checking the New York City plan. That's a good example for us. Do you mind sharing the link with Emmett? And that can be one that we look at as well. Okay. We certainly don't have to reinvent the wheel. And that's one of the reasons that we wanted to take a look at what other cities might be doing, whether other states, and seeing what we can adapt to our own policies here. And that rewriting the entire policy is on the table. If we want to start with what we have here, but make it more accessible, and to include some of the things that we've been talking about here today. Okay, any other observations? I thought everyone was going to be very quiet today and that we would be done in like 5 minutes. So I'm really heartened by your enthusiasm and your suggestions and your preparation for what we've gotten so far. Okay. So I'm looking at our agenda, and we've met our goal for today for sure, to generate a comprehensive list. And even though we're still adding other things as we go, as they come to mind or come to the surface, I think this is an excellent brainstorming session for us, to think about how we can shape a policy that is written for people to understand and participate in the process, and allow them to participate in the process, but also set parameters so that, like Jason said, people aren't putting in a lot of effort when they don't meet some of the preliminary criteria for the project that they're envisioning. Okay, Emmett, how are we doing?
My sense is very well. I've noted everything here, so I can send this out to all task force members. I know, Chair Westerman, you had mentioned at the beginning, and it ended up on the next steps or other notes on this note-taking document, the review of other policies that other cities or states have adopted, and you had mentioned seeing if anyone from this group would work with staff on pulling together a review of those and then presenting at the next meeting of the group. So I could definitely work with whoever steps forward on that front.
Okay, and are you talking about next meeting tomorrow, or are you talking about the next meeting in January?
My sense would be the next meeting in January, and okay. I've just been referring to meetings as kind of two chunk meetings. That's kind of how I've been referring to it, but if someone really wants to do by tomorrow, I'd be happy to work with them, but I think January might be a little more realistic.
Okay, all right. So if those of you who might be interested in working with Emmett and pulling some of those other policies and procedures and processes from other places, let Emmett know. Okay. I think we got a lot done. This is encouraging. And I'm not one to drag out meetings just because we have to go to 5 o'clock. And we've covered everything for today, right, Emmett?
Yep, that's what's on the agenda for today.
Okay, so the next thing on the agenda is closing. And we'll go in reverse order again. And in 1 or 2 sentences, what stood out for you most today? And I think for me, it has been just the spontaneous generation of ideas and comments that we've riffed off of each other's ideas to come up with a pretty comprehensive list. So thank you for that. Okay. Daniel, you get to go first.
Right. I appreciate it, as you put, Madam Chair, the preciseness of folks in their suggestions moving forward.
Commissioner Roberts Davis.
The efficiency that we use to move through all this material, that's a lot of work that we accomplished today in a fairly dense policy. So very good meeting.
Good. Let's see, Senator Nelson is not here. Representative Lee. Tess Jones.
I think I was also surprised by the efficiency in the ways that we move through the document, and consistent desire to make this process and the document more accessible. That was a wonderful surprise.
Good. Jennifer Jones. Oh,
there we go. Sorry. I'm gonna say something similar, which is that I've been through a lot of policy revision, and I think this was another good example of efficiency, of getting through a lot of work very quickly.
Dr. Jolly. Oh no, he had to leave a little bit early. Jessica Intermil.
I really appreciated folks' dedication. There was obviously a lot of work that went in before the meeting, so I'm really excited to keep going.
Good. And do we still have the Lieutenant Governor?
She just had to hop off a couple minutes ago.
Okay. Lindsey Dyer.
What stood out to me the most were some of the simple things that we caught, like examples and timelines and the language, how to apply. While it is there, it doesn't just say how to apply. So I'm happy that some of this more simple, accessible language has cropped up.
Okay. Auditor Blaha.
You know, kind of off of what Lindsay was saying there, I'm noticing that we are going to be getting rid of some of that lofty, very soaring language that the people who put this in, who I clearly loved what they were doing when they wrote this and wanted to make this very, very worthy of the magnitude of what they believed they were doing. So I appreciate that, and I also appreciate that some of that's probably going to go away.
Okay, Dr. Bean.
Hopefully you can hear me this time. I think something that really stuck out for me was that there were a lot of common goals for making sure that this is a process that is more accessible, and it felt good to work with everyone here today.
Good, thank you. Dana.
It's a little bit of an offbeat comment. I'm kind of mind boggled at the moment by next steps, and I know I'm getting ahead of myself, but that's just the way I am. I want to see the end result. There's a lot of stuff on paper now. Are we expecting staff work to happen to kind of assemble these comments and come up with drafts? Do we expect to see the other models from other locations first? How do we get all of these great ideas, synthesize them into a work product?
It's magic. All of the steps that you mentioned, consolidating the comments that we had today, and you'll be getting those in an email from Emmett and Maddie, taking a look at what other places are doing so we don't have to spin our wheels or reinvent the wheels before we spin them, and then take it from there. This was our brainstorming session, and I think we managed to get a lot done. Okay, Jason.
I appreciate the thoughtfulness that everyone brought to the table today and the preparation. And to Dana's point about road mapping And we have some set of documents that we were given at the very beginning that outline some goals. But now that we've dug into the work a little bit and we have a schedule, maybe if staff or whoever is able, in an ideal world, what does that roadmap look like in terms of deliverables at each and every session, and what we're expected to do along each signpost to get to our destination? I think that would be really helpful.
Excellent suggestion. Thank you. All right. Did I catch everyone? I think so. Good work, team. I can't believe I'm going to say this, but I'm excited about this policy. And I really appreciate all the preliminary work that you put in and the comments that you made today. I think we're heading in a direction, and like Jason said, we'll have a roadmap, but we're on our way. So thank you very much, and we will get the notes out to you and decide if we have more to talk about tomorrow. But we'll end early today and then get back with you with our agenda for tomorrow. And the sun is still shining. Yay. Okay.
Bye.
Thank you.